and welcome to this episode of John's Motorcycle Rescue and Review. Today I am with two classic Kawasaki KZ1000 motorcycles. The bike on the right is Kawasaki's 1979 KZ1000 Shaft, and this bike here is a 1981 Kawasaki KZ1000 CSR. Neither of these bikes was the sportiest bike in Kawasaki's lineup when they debuted. The KZ1000 Shaft was really designed to be a high-performance touring type motorcycle, and the KZ1000 CSR was designed to be more of a cruiser style motorcycle. The odd thing about both of these bikes is they share a lot of components with the very sporty bikes that were in the lineup at the time. In the case of the KZ1000 Shaft, it shared a motor and transmission with the KZ1000 Mark II. Kawasaki CSR 1000 shares most of its components with the KZ1000J. The CSR has different cams in it than the KZ1000J, and it's tuned more for mid-range power and low-end power, and it doesn't have quite the top-end power of the KZ1000J. The KZ1000 CSR shares the frame as well with the KZ1000J. That gives it very light handling, very agile handling. The main difference between the KZ1000 CSR frame and the KZ1000J frame was the angle of the steering neck. Both of these bikes are available on the classic bike market, and I actually paid the exact same dollar amount as my initial purchase price for both the KZ1000 Shaft and the KZ1000 CSR. Looking at the specs of the bike, the KZ1000 Shaft has a 1015cc motor. It makes 93 horsepower and 66 foot-pounds of torque. Features a 5-speed transmission. The KZ1000 Shaft ran a 12.5 second quarter mile at 107 miles per hour. Wet weight on the KZ1000 Shaft was right around 630 pounds, and top speed on the KZ1000 Shaft was between 125 and 130 miles an hour. Looking at the front of the bike, the KZ1000 Shaft has conventional forks. They are non-adjustable, and it features dual disc brakes up front, and those are acted on by big single piston calipers. I've upgraded the brake lines on this bike to steel braided lines, and it honestly has very good braking performance. The frame on the KZ1000 Shaft is a steel tube cradle type frame. Out back it features shaft flannel drive and conventional shocks that were adjustable for spring preload. It also features a large disc brake in the back with a single piston caliper acting on that. It features a large, wide, relatively flat seat that is comfortable for all-day touring, and a decently sized 4.8 gallon fuel tank. Instrumentation on the KZ1000 ST features a 160 mile an hour speedometer. It also features a large tachometer with a built-in fuel gauge, and the red line on the bike is at 8,500 RPM. Styling on the KZ1000 ST was a very squared off style that was reminiscent of the KZ1000 Mark II. Moving on to the KZ1000 CSR, it features the next generation of KZ1000 motor, and it shared no parts with the original KZ1000 motor. The motor in each of these bikes is a large, air-cooled, 8-valve, 4-cylinder motor. Power-wise, the CSR made 92 horsepower and 62 foot-pounds of torque. I'm going to give a disclaimer here. I have read the 93 horsepower rating for the KZ1000 Shaft, and either that's optimistic or the numbers for the CSR are pessimistic, because the CSR is certainly much quicker, even though the horsepower and torque figures are a little bit off of the KZ1000 Shaft. I'm not sure what's going on there. I think maybe in the time of the KZ1000 Shaft, Kawasaki was kind of boosting their numbers a bit to make it look more competitive with the XS1100, but I'm not quite sure what the discrepancy there is. Up front, the CSR features air-adjustable front forks, and it also features large dual disc brakes up front with single piston calipers acting on those. I've also upgraded the brake lines on the CSR to the steel braided units, and those function very nicely. Frame-wise, the CSR has a steel tube cradle type frame. Out back it features dual conventional shocks with preload adjustment and rebound adjustment. It also features chain final drive and a large disc brake in back that is acted on by a single piston caliper. I'm currently running a Delcovic 4-into-1 exhaust on this CSR. I think it sounds great. and you'll definitely hear the difference when we get out and ride these bikes in a couple of minutes. Instrumentation on the CSR is very similar to the KZ1000 ST. It features a large speedometer, a large tachometer with an inset fuel gauge, and the red line on the CSR is also 8,500 RPM. Weight-wise, the CSR is in the 550 to 575 pound range, and it's significantly lighter than the KZ1000 ST. Performance-wise, a well-ridden CSR could clock off an 11.5 second quarter-mile run at right around 110 miles an hour. Top speed on the CSR was also in the 125 to 130 mile an hour range. I have changed the handlebar on both of these bikes to the MGO Magna wide handlebar. I like that handlebar because it's a little bit lower than stock, it's a little bit wider than stock, and it gives me nice control over the bikes, especially in the handling department. What are these bikes like to ride? What are they like out on the open road? I'm going to gear up, I'll bring my camera along, let's find out together. Let's ride.
I'm currently riding Kawasaki's 1979 KZ1000 shaft, and the first thing I notice when I ride this bike is it's very smooth. It's got a very roomy and comfortable cockpit on it. At 60 miles an hour, I'm revving just under 4,000 RPM. And this is the kind of bike that just makes you want to get out and ride and put on lots of miles and enjoy the countryside. Being a tall guy at 6'4", this seating position really fits me nicely. Carburation on this bike is excellent. It is smooth up through the power band. There are no spikes as the revs rise. It never really seems to be in a terrible hurry to generate speed, but if you watch the speedometer, it does pick up speed in kind of a sneaky way. I've upgraded the front forks on this bike with some progressive springs and tuned those. This bike is really a gentleman's express. Up above 5,000 RPM, it really does start to pull nicely. As mellow as this bike feels in normal riding situations when you're just doing the speed limit, and as nicely as it carburetes, it's really surprising how much it opens up when you really give it the beans and get on it. The ride on this bike is very comfortable. The seat is flat and wide. I can be on this bike all day in comfort. The transmission shifts nicely between gears. It's a positive shift engagement. And as long as I keep the pace to a moderate level, this bike is fabulous. Once I start to push it a bit, it gets a little uncomfortable, and the chassis just kind of communicates, hey, let's back it down. I've upgraded the brakes on this bike with the Spiegler brake lines, and the braking performance is really nice. That's probably the one upgrade I would recommend for every vintage bike. Every time I ride the Kawasaki KZ1000 ST, I'm just reminded what a nice touring bike it is, and more of an open GT. It's just nice to get out and put miles on. And although it can go fast when you want it to, it doesn't ever pressure you to go fast. It's very relaxed. Again, I'm really impressed by the carburation on this bike and how smooth it is. It's smoother than a lot of the fuel-injected bikes I've ridden. This one has a stock exhaust, so it's quiet as you're touring down through the countryside. But when you get on it, it has that Kawasaki whistle to it, and I like it. Handling wise, this bike doesn't really do anything terribly quickly, and it's not really the type of bike that you want to be exploring unknown roads on at a brisk pace. And so it takes a little bit of forethought and a little bit of planning and a little bit of muscle to hustle it in the corners. I'm currently riding Kawasaki's 1981 KZ1000 CSR. And man, the first thing I noticed coming off the ST is how compact the seating position is. And this bike would definitely fit shorter riders better than the ST. The next thing I notice is that motor. And this bike pulls nice. This bike is also much more nimble than the ST. It changes direction very easily. And on a tight back road, the handling on this bike is excellent. Going up through the gears on this bike is so entertaining. I've got the Delcovic pipe and it just sounds great under hard acceleration. I've upgraded the brake lines on this bike to Spiegler steel braided brake lines, and the stopping power is awesome. I can't get over how neutral the handling is on this bike and how easy it is in corners. Very, very nice. Both of these bikes shift nicely with their 5-speed transmissions. This bike doesn't carburate as smoothly as the KZ1000 shaft below 3,000 RPM, but above that RPM, this bike just wants to rock it. It's not quite as smooth as the KZ1000 shaft either, so I'm getting more buzz through the handlebars. I'm not really getting much vibration through the seat or the foot pegs, but I do feel it in my hands a bit. At 60 miles an hour, this bike is revving right at 4,000 RPM, so it's revving a little bit higher than the KZ1000 shaft. With the lighter weight of the CSR and the quicker revving nature of its motor and the more sensitive throttle take-up that it has when you get on the throttle, this bike really feels like a sport bike. But as far as the cruiser goes, it is not as relaxing to ride as the KZ1000 ST. And if I'm doing longer distance days, I would rather ride the ST over this bike. Suspension-wise, this bike rides really nice. It can lose its composure somewhat on bumpier back roads, and so it kind of prefers smoother pavement. And for me, when I ride this bike, it's hard to be good. It's the kind of bike that puts a big smile on your face every time you go up through the gears. I love the sound from the Delcovic exhaust. I love the way that it turns in easily into corners. And this CSR is just the kind of bike that has me looking for beautiful, curvy back roads. That's awesome.
All right, what a lot of fun. Well, that just goes to show not all KZs are created equal. These two bikes have such different personalities, and it's so interesting to ride them back to back. When I get on the KZ1000 shaft, man, that just feels like a big bike. It is smooth, it is comfortable, it is kind of sneaky fast in the way that it makes power, and it's just a bike that you want to get on and go long distance on and ride it for, you know, hours at a time. It never feels like it's in a hurry, and it really doesn't like to be pushed too hard in the corners. It certainly goes around corners well at a moderate pace, but if the pace heats up too much, it kind of says, I'm not real comfortable with this, let's back it down a bit. The shaft final drive isn't terribly noticeable from the saddle, and my only complaint with it is there is some driveline lash, meaning when you get on and off the throttle, there's a little bit of take up that happens, and it's minor, but it's just a minor gripe. The ST carries its weight a little bit higher in the frame as well, and so it just feels like a much heavier bike than the CSR. In comparison to the KZ1000 shaft, this CSR is a hot rod. It sounds a little bit more like a hot rod because of the pipe I have on it, but that lightweight KZ1000J frame just allows the bike to handle really, really well. I think this bike would handle even better if it had the mag wheels of the LTD, but the CSR came with the lighter spoke wheels, and I think that may actually give it an advantage in the quarter mile compared to the LTD. The character of the motors in the bikes is very different too. The motor in the CSR spins up much faster. It feels like it has a much lighter flywheel in it. It's much quicker to rev, and this bike just feels like a sport bike every time I ride it. On a hot day during aggressive riding, the damping kind of goes away on the rear shocks, and so I could justify replacing those with some fresher units. But in normal riding, it doesn't ride bad. Both of these bikes ride comfortably. The CSR has a much lower center of gravity, and the lower seat height on the CSR makes it much more accessible to riders who aren't as tall as I am. Even as a tall guy, I'm 6'4", and the KZ1000 shaft is a tall bike for me. One gripe for me about the CSR is that the step seat really locks me in one position, and I would much rather have a flatter seat that allows me more front to back room. Because I'm locked in one position, after about half an hour of riding, I get somewhat fatigued. I'm also starting to sink through the seat foam at that point, and the bike just becomes a little bit uncomfortable for me for longer distances. I'd much rather be on the KZ1000 shaft on a longer ride. The very sporty, revvy nature of the motor in the CSR can also be a little bit fatiguing over time. It takes very little throttle to really accelerate hard, and so it's a little bit more on-off with the throttle. It's not as relaxed to ride for a longer distance, and therefore it's a hoot to ride on short jaunts. If I'm just going to go and have a fun ride and rip it up a little bit, I'll take the CSR. If I'm going on a longer ride and I want a more relaxed ride and a more comfortable ride, I'll definitely take the KZ1000 shaft. Well, I'd love to know what you guys think. If any of you out there are KZ1000 shaft fans or KZ1000 CSR fans, please feel free to comment in the comment section below. As always, I hope you found this video entertaining and informative, and until next time, enjoy the ride.